Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make chocolate sugar cookies, and this is what they look like. They're sweet and buttery with a really nice mild chocolate flavor, very nice plain, or as you can see here, you can also decorate them with royal icing. So first we're going to make the chocolate sugar dough, cookie dough. If you have an electric stand mixer like I have here, use your paddle attachment, or you could use a hand mixer, or really if you want, you could just large bowl wooden spoon. The first thing you need is 1 cup, which is 225 grams of butter. Have it at room temperature. I like to use the unsalted butter. I prefer the flavor. If you want to use salted butter, you could do that. I would leave out the salt in the recipe. So the first thing I'm going to do is just beat the butter just for maybe 30 seconds just to make it nice and creamy and smooth. Okay. And as always, when you're making cookie batter, cake batter, always scrape down the bottom and the sides of your bowl as much as you need to make sure all those ingredients are mixed together. So the next ingredient we need is sugar, because these are sugar cookies. So you will need 1 3/4 cups, which is 350 grams of granulated white sugar. And I'm also going to put in my vanilla extract at this point, because I find if you mix it with the butter and sugar, it even gets more vanilla flavor. So 2 teaspoons, 8 grams of pure vanilla extract. If you didn't want a vanilla flavor, you can leave that out if you prefer. So now what I'm going to do is beat this on medium-high speed for a couple of minutes. I want to get everything all mixed together and get a little bit of air into our batter. Okay. So as you can see here, this is kind of what we're looking for. It's kind of light, nice and fluffy. So now let's scrape that down. And now we're going to add 2 large eggs. I'm going to mix them and have your eggs at room temperature. And I'm going to mix the eggs in one at a time. So just mix the first one in and then mix the second. Good. If you find at this point your batter looks a little curdled, sometimes that can happen, especially if your eggs are a little cold. Don't worry about it. Once we add our dry ingredients, your batter will smooth right out. So in a separate bowl, I have 2 3/4 cups, which is 355 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know, you may know that as plain flour. Tongue-tied there. And then you will need, we're making chocolate sugar cookies, so you will need 3/4 cup, which is 75 grams of an unsweetened cocoa powder. My personal preference, there's 2 types. There's just your regular or natural unsweetened cocoa powder, and then you have your Dutch processed. I prefer to use the Dutch processed. I find a little milder flavor, which is what I want here for this sugar cookie. And then I'm sifting it, because I find cocoa powder always has lumps. So just using a strainer and that. Okay. And then you will need 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of baking powder. I'm going to get a little rise in our cookies. And then just a 1/2 teaspoon, 2 grams of salt. I prefer the flavor of kosher salt. It's a little milder, but you can use just a regular table salt. And like I said, if you use the salted butter, I would just leave that salt out. And then I'm just going to whisk. You could sift all your dry ingredients together, or I'm just using a wire whisk. Because you especially want that baking powder to get mixed in. You don't want any clumps of baking powder. Okay, so that looks good. And we're just going to add this to our batter and mix it all together. Now you want to do this slowly at the beginning because it's a lot of flour. You don't want it to kind of come up in your face. Okay, that looks good. So now we are going to, as you can see, we're making cutout cookies, so we are going to have to roll out our batter. Now, a lot of recipes call for you to just first chill the batter and then roll it out. I'm going to save us a step here, and I'm going to roll it out right away. Now, if you find, that is, unless you find that your batter is really soft, then you may have to chill it a little, but mine is quite stiff. So what I'm going to do is take, and how I do this is, get my stuff out of the way here, is I'm going to roll the batter between two pieces of parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, you could use wax paper, or actually you probably just use plastic wrap. So I'm just eyeballing this knife. Just take about half of your batter. It doesn't have to be exact because we're going to be doing cutouts, so. More. Okay. So I just kind of spread it a bit here. Thin it out just a bit. And then I take myself some room. I take another piece of parchment and put it over top. And then I'm just going to roll it until it's thin. Now what you want to do when you roll it is make sure your parchment paper doesn't wrinkle, both on the top, and then I periodically just flip it over just to make sure. And you want this pretty thin. I'd say, you know, somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch for your cookies, which would be, what, about 1/2 centimeter. Really, you can make them as thick or as thin as you want. The only difference will be in your baking time. Obviously, if you have a thicker cookie, it's going to take a little longer to bake. And the important thing, too, is you want it to be the same thickness. Because what you don't want is some of your cookies really thick and some of your cookies thin, and then the baking time will be different. So what I do, and I find this is a pretty good test, you just run your hand over it and you can really feel whether it's even thickness. There is that tendency to have the edges like thin and then too much batter in the center. So by rolling your hand over it, you can tell. So that's, that's almost right. So this is all you do. And then what we're going to do, I'm just going to put it on a baking sheet and put it into the refrigerator to chill until nice and firm. I find that it takes, probably 3-4 hours. What you could do is even overnight. I often just do it to this point, put it in the fridge, leave it overnight, and cut out my cookies the next day. Or actually, you could even do it for a couple days if you want to space it out. So that's all I do. As you can see, that's what you're looking for. So then I just take my baking sheet, flip it on, and I'm going to put this in the fridge, do my second one, and I'm going to let it chill, and when we come back, we will cut out our cookies. So now we're ready to cut out our cookies. So preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then you will need a baking sheet, and I like to line it with a piece of parchment paper, or you could just lightly butter it if you want. And then, so my batter is well chilled here. So I'm just going to peel that off, and then just whatever type of cookie cutter, whatever shape, whatever size, this is your more conventional type. kind of pretty easy. You just put it down and like that. As you can see, batter's nice and cold, so it just, or I want to use like a real fancy one, this type of mold. It is a little more difficult to use because you can't, you have to kind of lean down, try to get, and then you just press. Same sort of thing, and lift off. It's a little tricky here. You get these little holes. Just kind of push your cookie out. Like so. That's why you want your batter nice and cold, and then put it like that. And then just keep cutting. Okay, so that's enough, I think, for that sheet. So any leftover scraps you have, just gather them all up and re-roll, chill it, and then just carry on. And if you found after you cut out the cookies that they're a little soft, then what you could do is just take this sheet, pop it into the fridge for, you know, maybe 10 minutes just to firm up that batter, because what we don't want when they bake is for them to spread. So now I find in my oven with this size cookies about 10 to 12 minutes. What you're looking for, I know because chocolate cookies is kind of hard to know when they're baked, is just until when you touch the edges of the cookies, they feel firm. And I do rotate my baking sheet front to back about halfway through baking. So somewhere between 10 and maybe 12 minutes. Okay, so our chocolate sugar cookies are done. If you just feel the outside edges, they should be firm. That's when you know they're fully baked. I didn't say, if you didn't want to, I am going to show you how to decorate these cookies with royal icing. If you didn't want to do that, what you can do just before baking is sprinkle the tops of the cookies with like either just granulated white sugar or even that sparkling sugar if you want. So now, let them cool in the pan on a wire rack a couple minutes, and then just use your spatula to transfer them to the wire rack to finish cooling, because we are going to decorate them next, and you want them nice and cool before we do that. So that's what I'm going to do, and when we come back, we will start our royal icing. So now we're going to make our royal icing. So you'll need a large bowl, and then you will need 2 large egg whites. That would be 60 grams, and have them at room temperature. Now, I know some people don't like to use egg whites because we're not going to cook this, so you can buy pasteurized egg whites, or another alternative to making royal icing, you can go to the site joybaking.com, go to the chocolate sugar cookies, and under that I have a recipe to make royal icing with meringue powder, and you can find that usually at cake decorating stores or online, and that uses meringue powder, water. It's a similar recipe, it just doesn't use the egg whites, if that's what you prefer. So you have your 2 large egg whites, room temperature, and then to that I'm going to add 2 teaspoons, 8 grams of lemon juice, and then just take a whisk. Now you could do this in your electric mixer with the paddle attachment. I'm just going to do it by hand. So just whisk, kind of break up those egg whites. Okay, looks good. And then you will need 3 cups, that's 345 grams of confectioner sugar, also known as powdered or icing sugar. And then I always like to sift powdered sugar because it does have a lot of lumps, and we want our icing to be nice and smooth. So I'm just using like a regular strainer to do that. And then I'm just going to whisk it all in. And that's royal icing. Not too difficult. Like I said, if you want to use your electric stand mixer or even a hand mixer, you can do that. But really, we're just going to mix all this until it's nice and smooth. Important thing when you're making royal icing is if we are not using it, cover it with plastic wrap because it will form a crust very quickly and you don't want that. So that looks good. So as you can see, it's pretty thick. That's what you're looking for. So now you could use it plain, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to color it. So I'm going to pour it into, I'll use a couple different colors. You can use as many or as few as you like. But just for, like I say, the important thing is if you're not using it, cover it. And there we go. So I'm going to one at a time, so I'm going to just cover with some plastic wrap. Now there's two, you have to have really two thicknesses, at least the way I do it. As you can see here, I have two colors. I like to put like a border around the outside of my cookie, and that way it kind of like a dam, so it doesn't go over the sides, and then I fill it in later with a thinner royal icing. And I like the look of that. It looks more professional. You don't have to do that. Like this thickness that I'm doing right now, if you want, you could just take like a spatula or a knife and just cover your whole cookie. I mean, I do that with the kids when they were young. I just gave them a bowl and they just took a knife and spread it. I mean, but if you want a more professional looking, that's what you need. So now what I'm going to do, I'm using the gel paste food coloring. You could use the liquid or the powdered, whatever. And if you're using this gel, and you can go like cake decorating stores or whatever stores that carry the, things for baking. Just remember, if you're using the gel, it is very concentrated, so a little, as you can see, I didn't put very much in here, and I'm getting a pretty deep color pink. Okay, that looks good. Yeah, when my kids were young, this is what I used to have parties with the neighborhood kids, and they would come and I'd have all different color icings and lots of cookies, and I just let them have fun with it. So you don't need to do it really fancy. You can just take a knife and just spread it on. But we're going to do it the other way today. So I have a pastry bag. You could just use like a plastic bag and cut off the end. But I'm using, these are disposable ones. And then I've just got a small tip that's Wilton number 6. And then what I do, I put the tip in there, and then I just kind of press it in there, twist it and press it in, so that when I put the icing in, it doesn't run out the bottom at the beginning. And then I just put this on top of a plastic cup, makes it a little easier. I'm just going to cover that. And then I'm going to pour just a little, because I'm using, like I said, this thickness of icing is good for a border. And then I'm going to have to thin it out a little to do the inside part, what they call the flooding of the cookie. Now I am going to cover my frosting up because, like I said, I don't want to get a crust on that. And then you take your cookie. And then you press that down. And then I can release where I kind of stuffed it in there. So I'm going to do this over. So press it down, and then once you get it down pretty good, then twist. And so one hand as your guide and the other hand So just start wherever you want and try to do even pressure and a steady hand. Like so. Gee, I got that one not too bad. Sometimes I don't have a steady hand. Now, if you sometimes I don't have even pressure or I'm not, you could just take your finger and go along and just even it out. Like that, just to make it all perfect if you want it all perfect. So, I'm going to then, because I'm going to fill it in, but I want this to dry a little. So what I'm going to do is do a little more, same thing, and let these dry, maybe 10 minutes. And when we come back, I will show you how to flood on the inside with your icing. So now, once you have done all your outlining of your cookies and you've let it dry, mind if I touch it, it feels like that crust is formed. Then what I'm going to do is thin out the frosting in order to, like I said, to flood the inside. So I just take some water, maybe, I don't know, 1/4 teaspoon to start. It's better to under put, and then you can add a little more. You just want it thin enough so it flows nicely. It's a little too thick. And you can experiment. I mean, this takes a little bit of practice to get that feel of how thick, how thin. Good part is, they still taste great. Because you want it, you don't want to have to spread it too much. You want it the icing, because then you want it to be nice and shiny, like this matte color, nice and smooth. Well, what we're going to do is looks pretty good. Now, a lot of professionals, then what they do is, again, they put their icing in a pastry bag with a tip, and then they just pipe it on. I like to do it by hand. I know I'm going to get a lot of comments, but each to their own, I say. So I'm going to do it by hand. So I'm going to take my cookie, and then I take a little spoon, and then I spoon it in. And then I just kind of, like I said, for those people that want to use the pastry bag, you can do that. Okay. And I just take a little spatula and spread it. See, a border really helps. So your icing doesn't flood over the sides. And okay, and then once you have it done, what I like to do is just kind of shake it a little to even that out. And that's it. We're done. Isn't that gorgeous? Now, if you like, you could sprinkle. Sometimes you can let it dry a bit and then put some colored sprinkles on there. If you want to, you can let it dry and then take either the same color icing or a different color and pipe. Just take your pastry bag and pipe dots. I mean, or like swirls or whatever you want to do. I mean, this is one of these creative things that you can do as fancy or as not fancy. I just like that and then you can see the chocolate underneath. So then you want to let that dry. Now that can take, depending on how dry, if you're in a humid climate, that can take like several hours to really, you want that to dry really nice and hard before you store them, because you don't want to wreck that beautiful frosting. So just keep that in mind. So let's try one. It's really nice. Nice chocolate cookie underneath. Now, and then the royal icing, nice and sugary. Keep in mind, because you are putting a royal icing on there, that is going to soften your cookies a little, because that kind of seeps in there. But you can cover and store these for quite a few days. I'm in a humid climate, so I tend to even store them in the fridge because then they last a little longer. So try them. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.